All right. So thank you again for the intro, and thank you again for being so kind to welcome me here. And indeed, I would like to show you something about a CMS, specifically Orchard Core CMS, that's actually also under the umbrella of the .NET Foundation, the .NET Foundation all around. Now, if you are not using CMSs yet, I'm not sure about the plural here actually, CM systems. If you aren't using a CMS yet, I highly encourage you to check them out, even if not Orchard Core necessarily, but something like that. Because a CMS is just to alleviate some preconceptions that you might have. It's not about clicking together an app. It's rather about providing you with a foundation of not having to reinvent the wheel in the web context, in this case, of course. So you get something that that's also a framework, by the way. CMSs are usually all kind of frameworks. It's also a foundation feature-wise, both for users and both for administrators and also for developers. So a lot of stuff that you then don't need to reinvent in all of your web applications. And CMS projects are also kind of communities, of course, and there's also some kind of support. If you are joining an open source community, then there will be community support. There will be probably a couple of companies providing support as well. If you are joining the community of more like a CMS that's probably only partially open source or open core, and there's a company behind it, then you will get support from the company. Long story short, any CMS you use, just as with any higher level framework you use, you get a lot of stuff that makes your life easier as a web developer. Now, one of the CMSs out there that I think are among the best ones is Orchard. And if we take a look at the self-explanation of Orchard, which also rolls off your tongue really easily, then it kind of summarizes the whole thing very clearly. So let me explain these a little bit. Well, it's open source. Everybody understands that. It's also modular. So while an Orchard Core application by default is a monolith, within the monolith, it's modularized, of course. So it's not just one big project. There are a lot of projects that you can individually load or not load, even features in these projects that you can individually switch on or off. There's a lot of modularization that you would expect from a contemporary .NET, bigger .NET system, of course. It's also multi-tenant. That means that from a single Orchard Core application, you can run multiple seemingly independent Orchard Core websites. So users can interact with these websites or web applications in general without them noticing that they have anything to do with each other. They can have different content configuration, different users, everything different, just the code and the application, so like the application in IIS or in Docker is the same. And that helps you a lot with site density and hosting. If you are running kind of similar applications for a lot of customers, then this is a game changer. And just as CMS is usually, Orchard is also an application framework. It provides you with some kind of an idea of how to structure your app, how to structure your plugins, because of course you are always extending Orchard, what's built into it. And we are at a .NET meetup, so of course it builds on top of ASP.NET Core, and it extends ASP.NET Core. So a little bit of details, a bit more numbers. Orchard builds on top of .NET 6 and 7, so it targets both. Once .NET 8 is out, I would presume sometime later this year in November, it will also be upgraded to .NET 8. As mentioned, it's built on ASP.NET Core, specifically on MVC, so it follows the MVC paradigm. Now, Orchard itself follows the MVC paradigm, but in your extensions to Orchard, in your plugins that you write for Orchard, you can use other paradigms as well. MVC being a simple choice, of course, but that's not a necessity. As mentioned, it's under the umbrella of the .NET Foundation, and it's completely open source. It's very active, so we have thousands of commits, hundreds of contributors, thousands of issues. Most of them are actually closed, so people are not just opening issues, but these are also being fixed, and the features are being implemented by the community. So there's a lot of life going on here. By the way, currently I'm talking about Orchard Core, but Orchard Core also had a previous edition called just Orchard CMS Orchard 1, and that was the original Orchard version, built on the legacy.NET framework, legacy ASP.NET MVC, and it was created, I think, originally around 2008. 2009 was when it first was unveiled publicly. And I'm just mentioning this, that there's also a lot of experience from a prior edition of Orchard going into Orchard Core. It was at the time also a very active community and a very active project. It's still supported, but of course, if you are creating a new application that you want to create on top of Orchard Core. Now, just to give you some perspective a bit more, as mentioned, Orchard first appeared in 2009. I actually joined the project in 2011. So yeah, a very, very long time ago now, especially in internet years. And Orchard Core was first started in 2014. Now, if you may remember, that was the very early days of .NET Core and the ASP.NET Core. And with every even major release, huge changes were coming. So the whole thing was very unstable. Because of that, Orchard reached a production-ready state around 2019, but we officially released 1.0 in 2021. And currently we are at 1.6. I'm from a company called Lombiq Technologies, by the way. We have been Orchard since 2013, so exactly a decade. Exactly a decade in like 2 weeks. That's also a very long time. And since then, we have done pretty much anything that's possible with Orchard. We have seen it all. We are currently a team of around 20 developers, and we have worked with clients ranging from individual developers and SMEs all the way up to Microsoft itself, or the Smithsonian Institution, or Live Nation. Now, why would you use Orchard apart from all of these specifically? Well, the first thing is that if you know ASP.NET Core, especially if you know ASP.NET Core MVC, that's still applicable. Orchard builds on top of these. Orchard extends these underlying frameworks. So everything you know, you can still utilize, and Orchard adds a lot of stuff to it, even on the code level. So for example, HTML localizer, string localizer, authorization service, I think it's called, HTML context accessor. All of these services built into ASP.NET Core are extended, implemented by Orchard, for example, and of course a lot of higher level features as well. As mentioned, it has a lot of features, and those features are also very extensible and very flexible. So it's not like you have this content model and be happy with it or get lost. Rather, everything can be swapped out. Everything is optional. So in a minute, I will show you kind of the full-blown Orchard offering, but you don't have to use everything from there. But still, you get a lot of features from content management, user management, everything related to files, mentioned multi-tenancy, audit trail workflows, whatever. I will show you a lot a bit later. And if you are quite new to .NET, then or programming in general, then I also recommend you to join either Orchard or a similarly large open source community, open source project, because you can become a lot better developer. That's actually also one of my personal stories. How I became an actual professional .NET developer was with Orchard. And by the way, some of the people who work on ASP.NET or ASP.NET Core itself are also contributing to Orchard. So you are in good company. And as mentioned, joining a CMS community is not just about the software. There's an actual community, other people who can help you, people that you can exchange ideas, code with, people who you can hire. So you get a lot of people there who you can collaborate with. And when it comes to open source, I'm biased, of course. I'm very keen on open source. When it comes to open source, it's kind of an awesome thing. And well, a lot of talk until now. Let's actually see Orchard in action. So I will show you now a couple of Orchard websites, both Orchard Core and a couple of Orchard ones as well, just to give you an idea of the kind of teams, companies using Orchard. Now, this is actually quite a simple website, but I'm just showing you because you surely know the Transformers franchise. This is a video game website by a UK company, actually. I'm not sure whether it's public here. Yeah, it's not public here, so I won't be able to tell which one. Perhaps it's private information. But this also shows an example of an Orchard Core application where you can ramp up such smaller mini sites for a specific campaign, for a specific game, or something like that very quickly. They have a lot of such websites. The Royal Veterinary College that you probably know is also using Orchard. So this is an Orchard website with a lot of stuff, a lot of cats. So that's already a big plus. But Orchard can be used, of course, not just for website-like applications, but more involved web applications as well. Fly Egypt is an airline company website with everything that you would expect. So apart from just content, they also have, for example, a booking feature and a lot more. House of Blues, which is a brand of the huge event organizer company Live Nation, also runs on Orchard. And by the way, this is also a multi-tenant app. House of Blues is an umbrella brand with a lot of event venues, pubs, restaurants, these kind of things. And they have a lot of them here. The city government of Santa Monica also uses Orchard. There are quite a lot of governmental organizations, agencies using Orchard as well. Actually, there are two other examples that I would like to show you. The Smithsonian's Folkways recordings. You surely know the Smithsonian, the biggest museum institute in the world. Folkways recordings is their music label. And the funny thing is that this is an Orchard Core site, but they also have two other websites running Orchard One. And so we hope to have them migrate these. And Washington State, the state governments, and specifically the Employment Security Department's office also uses Orchard. You can check these out and also a lot more examples of Orchard on our website called Show Orchard. So this is meant to be a gallery of Orchard websites that we want you to know about. So either those that are large or very interesting, look cool, have an interesting content or something along those lines. And now we have seen what Orchard is about, and we have seen a couple of examples of Orchard, but let's actually play with it. So let's go ahead and try to break it. I'm saying try to break it because, you know, it's the course of demos. Something breaks that never broke before. So let's try to break it live. I have an Orchard solution here. So as I mentioned, Orchard builds on top of ASP.NET. It doesn't substitute ASP.NET or any existing knowledge of yours. It's ASP.NET supercharged. And the root web project in this solution is, as you can see, also an ASP.NET web project, plus two Orchard Core packages added. By the way, this solution I generated with the command line code generation templates that Orchard provides for the .NET CLI. And it's quite a small solution. Apart from this web project, we have a so-called theme and a module. These are two kinds of Orchard plugins. We call them extensions in Orchard, and modules are about extending the features of Orchard, like providing features, while themes are about providing look and feel, styling. So pretty much you would put most of your CSS, HTML in form of Razor or Liquid templates and JavaScript into themes, and you would put most of your C# into modules. We'll see examples of these, but for now, let me just start this app. I've hit Ctrl F5, and now Orchard is starting locally here. Once it loads, we'll see the setup screen. That's where the whole Orchard story starts. By the way, it's localizable. Localization is built into Orchard, both for the content and both for the UI strings here. But I only know English and Hungarian well. Actually, there's no Hungarian localization, it's just an option here. And I know a little bit of German, but I'm not sure. Yeah, it's actually localized in German, mostly. But let's go back to English. That's, I would presume, most of the people know best here. And this is how you set up Orchard. Well, first of all, you need to give a name to your site. Let's call it demo. Now, you can change almost everything later as well. And then you have to select a recipe. Now, what is a recipe? It's technically it's a JSON file that contains content and configuration that you export from another Orchard app or that you somehow generate. This is useful because with recipes, you can create kind of site templates, like having a template for a site that's for a company, like an agency or a blog or something else. There's also this headless recipe. Now, by the way, Orchard has three, let's call it hosting models or models of operation. It's not really hosting per se. One, there's the full CMS when Orchard runs both the admin area and the user-facing frontend. That's what I will show you. The second is decoupled. In that approach, the frontend is not driven by Orchard, but it's still the same application. You can use then Razor pages or plain vanilla MVC to implement that frontend, independent of how Orchard drives the frontend. But you can still load content from Orchard. And the third one is headless, that we see the recipe for here, where you have two applications. There's the Orchard application providing the backends and the content storage, and there's a separate application loading content via web APIs from the Orchard app and displaying or otherwise presenting it to users in any other form. It can be a web app, a completely separate web app, or it can be a mobile app or whatever else. For now, I will use blog because that's simple. You can, by the way, also select the time zone here. You can also select the database engine to use. These are what Orchard supports out of the box. This is, by the way, also extensible. We commonly use SQLite for local development because, it's simple. It's just a single file. But in production, I would, of course, recommend something like SQL Server, or MySQL, MariaDB, or Postgres. So let's go with SQLite for now. And let me create a default user. I will use the very secure password, password1 exclamation mark. Now, this is a password we conventionally use for local development. not for production, obviously. And now the setup has run. It created the database, run some initialization, and here we have our blog. The blog contains, well, blog, also a blog post with some metadata, some content. We also have some tagging and categorization here, and an about page. So a very simple blog. Of course, this is not meant to be as a full blog, but rather a jumpstart that you can use to create your blog on top of. And let me log in. Under /admin, you can find the Orchard admin area. It's pretty simple to use as well at the first glance at least. By the way, yeah, it can also be used from smaller screen devices if you prefer to do that. And here on the left-hand side menu, you can access all the content and configuration of Orchard. Now let's take a look at our blog first. Here are the details of our blog, and here's our blog post. As you can see, something that you'd expect, but all of this is built into Orchard. Like a blog post has a title, a URL, and a body, which is, by the way, written in Markdown. Out of the box, Orchard supports both Markdown for such content bodies and HTML directly. And all the other configuration for a blog post is also here. Now, okay, let's keep this open because I will show you something in a second, and also open this about page. And you might already notice something similar. This about page also has a title, also has a URL, and also has a body, although this is HTML body. So this is the other way of saving bodies here. And if I put the two side by side, the similarity will be very clear. Both of these have a title, the same kind of title, apparently, same kind of permalink. What is happening here? Now, a blog post is a simple piece of content. Such an article is also a simple piece of content. But what makes this interesting is the extensibility of the Orchard content model. What you are seeing here are what we call content items in Orchard. And they have shared or reusable content parts. The title of a blog post is driven by the same piece of code like the title of the article. The same with the permalinks. Orchard provides such building blocks that you can freely mix and match. You can create your own such content types, as we call them, like you could create a page content type that could also have a title, or you could have a team member content type that could either use a title for the team member's name, or you could add a new field or a new such content part for something else. So these are the basics of the content model, very flexible, very extensible. And while Orchard has a lot of such features built in, you can always add your own. You can add your own in exactly the same way that Orchard adds these, because these content parts and these features that are coming with Orchard are nothing special. Your own extensions, your own code that you implement similar features with can work in exactly the same way. And oops. And speaking of the building blocks, we can quickly also check out what we call, as I already mentioned, the terminology content types. Because what you see on the left-hand side is a specific blog post content item. It's a content item made from the content type blog post. You can think of this like a content type is like a class, and this specific blog post on the left here is like an object made from that class. And here on the right, you see actually the schema, the definition, the configuration of the blog post content type. There's a lot of metadata, but the interesting thing is down here. here are those content parts that I mentioned. Here's the title that I mentioned drives this piece of functionality here. Here's the author route that drives this permalink functionality, and all the others. These are the mentioned building blocks. As you can see, you can add other parts to a blog post. If you want to change what the blog post does, you can do it like that. If you don't like how a blog post works, you can also remove content parts. So that's where the whole flexibility comes from. There's also, I already mentioned pages, and there's also something, there's also a content type called page actually here. There's no existing page yet, but you can create one. The page is, well, something that you would expect, a static content page. It's a bit similar to article, but it's a bit also more complex because it has this so-called flow part editor here. And in this flow part, you can add widgets, like a raw HTML widget. That's exactly as the name suggests, something where you can provide raw HTML. And this you can use for a more complex page editor, and not just eyeballing the whole thing from the admin, but there's also a live preview feature with this preview button. So if I change the text here, you see that it's immediately updating on the right. I can also add other widgets here, like like a block quote one. I can't think of any better text than hello. Sorry, you know, that's how software developers start with every demo. And by the way, you see there's also a save draft and a publish button. Now, this brings us over to Orchard's draft and content versioning capabilities. Because let me publish this. And now this page is out in the open. If I click the view button here, you see this page is now public. If I go here and edit it like this and click Save Draft, then it's not refreshing on in the public version. Of course, it's not refreshing because what I saved was only a draft.
Recording in progress.
I didn't publish it. So I can edit away here, just the draft. And when I hit publish, well, only then is when the content will be publicly available. There are also versions being saved behind the scenes. And how you can make these versions visible, by the way, is with the, with the so-called audit trail feature. Now I open the feature menu of Orchard. As I mentioned, Orchard is very extensible and very much modularized. Under this feature menu, we see all the built-in features of Orchard, including this audit trail one that I will enable. You see, it's a pretty big list that we have here. These are, by the way, documented on the Orchard documentation site, as you don't need to figure out just by looking at this list what each of these features do. And when you extend Orchard, you also create, or one of the options, as mentioned, is to create such modules. Now, I have the audit trail feature enabled. Let me also configure it to save content events. The audit trail is about recording what happens in the system. If you want to know who changed what content or configuration, the audit trail will help you with that. And now I will instruct it to record events for the page content type. By default, it doesn't record any content item events. And now if I go back to content and open my demo page, this is, and publish it, this is where this will be the first recording in the audit trail. So now we can actually start utilizing audit trail. Like I can change this content item again and rename the title as well, like with audit trail, publish. Now, if we go to the audit trail menu, we should be able to see the different versions here. So you see the first version that was recorded after I actually enabled the audit trail feature was the old one, and then you can see the changed content item too. Actually, if we go to the details here, you can also see a diff between the two versions of the content item. Like, yeah, the title changed, some metadata also changed, and that raw HTML widget also changed, as you can see here. By the way, if you don't like to write HTML by hand, and probably, although you are maybe a web developer, you don't like to write HTML by hand, you can also go to content definitions and check out how that raw HTML widget looks like, because that's also a content type. When you create a content item, that's also, when you create a raw HTML widget, that's also a content item made of this raw HTML content type. And here you can see that its content is stored in such a field. The field is another building block. It's a smaller one. Don't worry about it now. And you can change its editor either to a proper code editor like Monaco, or you can change it to a Trumbovig WYSIWYG editor, for example. So now if I go back to our page, we see that this is, although the widget is still called raw HTML, we didn't rename that, but now we don't have to hand edit HTML. So again, there are features provided by Orchard in a configuration, that's the default, but you can change, reconfigure, swap out, substitute everything. It's very, very extensible. But let's take a look at some other features that are built, and just a quick rundown. There's, of course, user management that I would say is probably the second most important after content management. I won't go into much details here because this is exactly how you would expect. It has role-based access control as well. Again, everything is extensible, everything can be changed. You can create your own roles, you can edit a default role, and select which permissions these users have. By default, Orchard provides local user accounts, but you can also use social login. You can use Active Directory login. You can implement your own logins as well. You can also implement your own user store, by the way, if you like to swap that out. There's also, still talking about something related to content management, there's also search and indexing. By default, it's not enabled, by the way, just something that we call querying. But if we go to recipes, we'll see that there's also a Lucene search recipe. Now, remember recipes that we have seen on the setup screen? This is the same concept, but you can use recipes not just during the setup. You can use recipes to add some content and change some configuration also on an existing Orchard Core website. And you can also add recipes to your application, to your code, that you want to allow administrators to execute like this, like to set up search, what I will do now. By the way, you may notice that we have both Lucene and Elasticsearch. This is because Orchard supports both. Lucene is for simpler use cases with local search index files, and Elastic is when you are going into the cloud and you want to externalize indexing and storing the indices because you want horizontal scalability for your web server. And now that we have search set up here, we actually have more menus here, including having a Lucene index. And if you go to the front end and open search, we can actually also search. I think explore is one of the terms here. And it works like you would expect a search feature to work. Well, not much to search here because we have a single blog post, but you get the idea. And Another quite interesting built-in feature is the workflows one. As I mentioned, there are a lot more, a lot of features built into Orchard. So I'm just glancing at the surface here, but this is something that I wanted to show you. And workflows is kind of visual programming. So, for example, if you want to display a message to a user based on some kind of criteria or event, which would be a very simple use case, you can use workflows. Now, in such a workflow, there's also always an event that starts the workflow. For example, and there are a couple of events built in, and you can also extend this. But for example, there's the content published event. So if somebody publishes like a page or let's say a blog post, then this workflow will start. And I'm also marking this as the startup task of the workflow, because although a workflow always needs a startup task, a startup event, it can have multiple tasks. Of course, because now comes when we actually display the notification or the message. And when you click Add Task, we'll see a longer list of what's built into Orchard. And there are simple tasks like this notify or log, which writes to the application log. But every important task that you can do Orchard from the admin, you can also automate with workflows. And again, this list is also extensible. And by the way, while workflows is very, very useful, this is not the only way to hook into these events and do these tasks programmatically. Of course, you can do all of these things from code too. And here we can display a message that I also added as a snippet for quick reference. Yeah, just a thank you message with referencing this user.identity.name. Now, probably this does ring a bell because this is ASP.NET Core identity, of course. And why we have these funny brackets here is because this is Liquid, the Liquid markup. Now, if you don't know the Liquid markup language, it's a quite simple, intentionally restricted, intentionally safe templating language. Shopify invented it, I think, and in Orchard we use it for such dynamic strings or dynamic configuration where you want to add some such dynamic substitution or some kind of little scripting to such configuration. So if I save this, now we can connect the two. This is how workflow looks like. There's an event, and then there's a task, and then you can add more tasks, and you can add more complex tasks. You can send out emails. You can call webhooks. You can have ifs, so conditions in such workflows. You can have loops. So as I mentioned, it's like visual programming. And if I save it and now go back to our trusty demo page and I hit publish, you see that our message, including the username, is now displayed. So you can very quickly, just from the admin, add some dynamic programmatic behavior. But again, this is not the only way you can do that. You can do the whole thing from code. And I have to admit that this is actually what I prefer. But workflows is very nice if you want to have all of these things in a user configurable way, which is especially useful for emails when you send out custom emails, because the email templates are things that you want your users, your admin users, to be able to edit. There's a lot more features in Orchard, but I don't want to go into each of these. Instead, let's take a look at the code a little bit. Let me go back to Visual Studio. And as mentioned, we have such a theme here. And as I explained at the beginning, a theme is kind of a plugin in Orchard that provides look and feel, styling. This, of course, doesn't contain anything yet because it was freshly generated from the command line. It only contains a view. a layout template. As mentioned, by default, Orchard extensions are written in the following the MVC paradigm, which again is not a necessity, not a requirement, but this is the default. So that's why we have views here. And this is a liquid template. So same template engine that I mentioned before. But liquid is simple, liquid is safe. There are many people who can write liquid, but this is not the only way to do it. Razor templates are also supported. And if you have a hardcore development team, especially if the people also work with C#, then Razor would be the choice I would recommend to you. And well, we won't write much code, but let's at least try this out. So we have our theme here. Let's try to enable it first. If we go back to the admin, under this design menu, we'll see a list of themes. Now, these are the built-in themes of Orchard. There are a couple of them, and we have our demo theme listed here. Now, let me make it the current theme, and let's check out how the front end looks now. Well, good job. It's much uglier now. It was totally worth it enabling and implementing our theme. Now, of course, it's ugly because our theme doesn't contain any code, just this template here. But let's try it out whether it actually works. And can you guess what I will write here? Of course, it will be hello. Now, let me save it and let me refresh on the left side here. And it worked. Fantastic. When you are starting Orchard development, I recommend you start with theme development because this is the easiest and this is the most spectacular. You can quickly do something that has some nice results. You can make your site nice. You can add your custom quirks to it. And as you can see, you write the code, you refresh, that's it. If you use browser sync, then you don't need the manual refresh either, or browser link even. So very simple. Now, of course, this is not what hardcore developers are enthusiastic about, writing liquid templates. So let's take a quick look at some C#. And now writing writing enough C# code for an Orchard application here that it would be actually meaningful would be a very boring task because you just watch me type. But let me open up the source of Orchard itself. It's open source, right? So we can just take a look at Orchard itself and see how it looks like. And we have seen the title part working. Let's actually take a look at how the title part works in the code. Now, I search for title part, and the title part itself is actually a class. That's the title part. That's the part. And if we go back to the admin and take a look at our page, well, yeah, the title part only contains a title, so that's the only thing that it needs to store. That's where the whole thing starts, but there's a lot more. Let me go to that project. And as you can see, there are a lot of projects in Orchard, well, more than 200. And what we are looking at here is actually the title module. It's a module that you could also write, because this is how a module, when it actually has some substantial code, looks like. There's also a views folder here. So if you wonder where this editor is actually coming from, well, here's title_part.edit. So this is the piece of code that generates this text box here. When you are creating a content part, then you are always plugging into the full editor of Orchard. So you don't need to create a full form with everything. Rather, you just need to implement a piece of a form. So that's why you see there's not much here, apart from a label and an input field. And that's this editor for the title here. Otherwise, it's MVC as usual. So we also have view models, of course. And speaking of view models, where is actually this displayed from? For that, in Orchard, we have drivers. Drivers are kind of like mini controllers. In Orchard, everything needs to be extensible. Everything needs to be possible to swap out and turn on and off independently. So if we want to display this editor here, we can't have a controller that returns a view. We need to have something that just generates this piece here. And this is what drivers do. A driver generates the core of the job of drivers is generating template displays. We call this, by the way, shapes here. So a driver has a display method, for example, that's called when the content item is displayed on the front end. And it also has an edit that's called when we look at the editor, and the update async is handling the post back. So when you publish or save a content item, this is the method that will be called where you actually handle the form submission. And you see that it's using the ASP.NET Core model binder for that here. And after that, it's pretty straightforward. In such a driver, you manage everything necessary for the edit and the display of such a content part. So again, like a mini controller. There are a lot of Orchard-specific things here to make it work, but that's the gist of it. There's a lot more that you can do with a content part or from a module, but this goes into more and more details. But just to give you an idea for a quick start, a module in Orchard is an ASP.NET Core area plus only one thing, a manifest file. A manifest file is, well, pretty much exactly that. It tells Orchard some metadata about the module, mostly what's displayed on the Orchard admin. So you see, here you can give a human readable name to your module and the description and a couple of other things. But once you have such a project with such a manifest file, well, it's actually a module assembly attribute, you have an Orchard module, and you can start creating your controllers and everything as standard MVC just to play with Orchard, just to try extending it in such basic ways. And then you can continue extending it in the very Orchard-specific ways if you really want to hook into the inner workings of Orchard. All right, that was my demo. And a couple of closing remarks. If you want to host Orchard somewhere, then it's a good thing that you can host it anywhere where .NET runs. It's cross-platform, of course. You can, for example, use IaaS, Azure App Services, IaaS in the cloud, probably the easiest way if you like to do that. Orchard can be also containerized, so Docker is an option too. Or if you don't want to write C# code, but if you are okay with just configuring an Orchard application from the admin and writing some Liquid code and CSS JavaScript for theming, then you can also check out our SaaS called .nest. There you click and get an Orchard application in minutes. This is, by the way, an example of multi-tenancy. You actually get a tenant in a multi-tenant application. And if you like to read further, I really hope you did like this quick introduction. Then I suggest you check out the main website of Orchard, probably the best way to start. The docs are also linked from there. Also check out Orchard Dojo. Orchard Dojo, orcharddojo.net is our website at Lombiq. It contains a lot of learning resources related to Orchard, a weekly newsletter, and blog posts about weekly news about Orchard. The Dojo course is also a tutorial series that's brings you from 0 to hero when it comes to becoming an Orchard developer. We also have a project called a training demo that teaches you how to code an Orchard application just with code. So there are no videos, not log text, just code with comments. And finally, this is a very time-sensitive offer. I recommend you to take part on the first online Orchard conference, Orchard Harvest. That will be in 2 weeks' time on the 21st. So a good way to start Orchard and get to know the community a little bit better. So that was it. Thank you very much. If you'd like to get in touch with me, feel free to do that. I would be happy to answer any question of yours or anything else. And if you have any questions now, we also have a little bit of time, I believe.
There were a few questions in the chat, in the Discord chat. I can read them out, I guess.
Yes, please.
So Adam did ask, saying, could you use the headless CMS to be the data for generating a static website from? I kind of guessed an answer, but I don't know 100%.
Yeah, thanks for the question. And the answer is yes. The longer answer is that you need to implement one of the sides of these. So if you want to generate a static website from the content of an Orchard application, then you either need to implement kind of a static website generator that pulls data from the Orchard web APIs, or you need to implement an Orchard module that generates the static files right away. A more common scenario is what I explained, that you have a separate application which is not a static one, but a separate one from Orchard, and that it queries Orchard content live.
I think in your slide on that, was it that there's a GraphQL module available?
Yes, indeed.
Right. Okay, so you could plug it into like Next.js or Gatsby if you fancy punishing yourself or something like that.
Yes, indeed. For querying content, Orchard has a GraphQL API. For content modification, for content CRUD, pretty much, there are a couple of RESTful API endpoints.
Okay. And can I just ask, so the modules we were just looking at in the code demo, obviously the title part kind of had its own project. So even if we're using if we wanted to use Orchard as a headless a content store, so purely managing the content and then using something along the lines of Next.js to actually give us our web front end, do you still have to implement all of that project in terms of like the views, etc., or that you just use the subset that you would need to make the admin insertion work?
You can use a subset. So what we see in the Orchard solution, all of these hundreds of projects, this is the whole of Orchard. The application that I started actually contains, well, not all of these, but most of these. But you don't need to do that. You can choose to, for example, not install the built-in themes if you are going headless, for example, or decoupled. You can choose not to install anything related to content management if you don't require content management, just something like user management, the data storage features, etc. And otherwise, you can also mix and match. So all of these projects are basically NuGet packages in the end. Just to be clear, you use Orchard from NuGet. Of course, I'm just showing you the full source code as an example. But all of these are optional. You can mix and match what you want. You can also only pull in, let's call it like that, the interfaces from Orchard if you want to swap out something very low level and provide the implementations yourself.
Okay, thank you.
There's quite a few other questions in the chat. Richard's done a whole bunch of questions. I don't know, Richard, whether you fancy taking over for these.
I am perfectly happy to. So my first one is, can I secure pages? Basically, what I want to be able to do is I'd like to be able to delegate management of a section of the website to a team of helpers.
Mhm.
And would they be able to do things like add and remove pages within that area as well?
Thanks for the question. Yes. So I just very briefly showed that Orchard has user management and role-based access control as well.
You did.
This is where you would start. Now, if you open, let's open, for example, the editor role. Again, everything that I'm showing you here is extensible. So this is what's here right now, based on the configuration of this current app. But you can customize this inside out. And we have a lot of permissions here. What's notable is that for your question is that we also have something related to like the blog content type here, or above there was also something related to the blog quote content type. Now, I don't think we have something for the blog post here, but let's say that you want to delegate management of your blog. I mean, the content of your blog to some people, so the blog post. Then what you would do is that you go to the blog post content type. You click securable, so it's a content type that can be secured. Save. And now if I go back to this role editor and refresh, we will see that we also have a lot of permissions for the blog post content type. So here you can tell Orchard to provide certain people with just a permission to like edit blog posts, nothing else, no other content, no other configuration, just blog posts. We can also tell Orchard to just allow people to edit just their own blog posts. If you don't enable or don't allow this permission, edit something for others, then they will only be able to edit their own. You can also say that, well, they can create blog posts and they can edit their own blog posts, but they can't publish it. So somebody else needs to review it. Well, if you don't give them the publish permission, then they won't be able to publish it for the front end.
Okay, that sounds like it would apply to all blog posts. So if you had something like several people who blog on this, I don't know if this is reasonable, if you have several people who blog on this site and one of those is a team blog, you want several people to be able to use, and others are individual personal ones. Does that work, or would you have to create more custom content types to be able to do that?
Well, great that you observed one of the options. Indeed, one of the options would be that you create other content types. There's no built-in feature for that, but there's a third-party module that provides content item level permissions like this as well. So you can also restrict what people can do with an individual blog post even.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Dan gave me the option for several questions, so I'm sorry I'm going to monopolize this for a moment. Is there some way I can import bulk content? I'm specifically thinking about switching from some other CMS.
These almost sound like loaded questions to showcase the benefits of Orchard.
No, these are loaded questions for things that I want to do.
yeah, and good questions, all of these. Thank you. Yes, Orchard has a facility for that, actually multiple ones. I already talked about recipes, and I've already showed, for example, this feature here. Now, you can also use the recipes feature to import content directly from files that you upload. Specifically, there's also such a package import feature where you would upload a JSON or a zip file with JSONs, or even a JSON directly. So when you're migrating from another system, actually also when you are migrating from Orchard 1, you can generate such a JSON and, well, import it here. It's very straightforward. It's just, the blog post, the title, and the permalink. You have the same thing that you have seen on the admin in the JSON too. If it's just a one-time migration, then this is what you would use. If you continuously want to push content to an Orchard Core website, then you can use the previously mentioned RESTful API.
Okay, cool. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dan. I'm done.
I'm just looking through the chat, see if there's any more.
I'll ask one in the meantime. Is there? I might have missed it because I did have to nip off and get another glass of wine at one point. Unfortunately. Is there a concept of like a content hierarchy or a content tree, or is every content item essentially standalone? So how do you manage relationships between content items and any kind of navigational tree structure?
Yes. There's no simple answer to that, apart from, yes, there is a content hierarchy. But how do you manage hierarchy depends on the specific needs. There's actually a documentation page exactly for this question. I'm very proud of this because this was written by me. But to give you a quick idea, so be sure to check this out. Called Content Relationships is the page's title if you want the detailed answer. But for example, the blog itself that we have here is such a hierarchy. The blog is a content item. You can actually edit it. Here's the title of the blog itself. And the blog posts are items kind of below or related to that blog content item. By the way, if you want to run something like a team blog, then most possibly you would have multiple such blogs as well. Not everybody would blog in the same blog. That's one way. I very briefly mentioned, well, it looks ugly now, so it will also look ugly here. But I very briefly mentioned that there's also tagging and categorization with a feature called taxonomies. These are like this. That demonstrates another way of a content hierarchy. So if you go to categories, which only has a single category right now, you can also have a tree of categories. I'm not sure whether this taxonomy has that that enabled specifically. Oh yeah, we need an icon. I mean, we need an icon. But yeah, it has enabled. So you see, it starts to begin to become a hierarchy. There are multiple ways as well, but the short answer is yes, there is a hierarchy. And again, I'm just repeating myself over and over. This is also extensible. So what I'm showing you here is the configuration of Orchard as it comes from the blog recipe. But there are other recipes, and regardless of recipes, you can also create these yourself, and you can create a lot more from code or even just by clicking around.
Nice, thank you.
Well, it looks like every other question in the chat has answered itself. As in, people replied, and I think there was one about different themes, and yeah, I think that sorry, there's lots of different noise in there as well. One sec. No, I think everything's is it Richard said this is a marketplace for reusable modules, and then like shopping, for example, and Klex replied saying there's an open source one on GitHub, and then there's a bit of chat around there. But I think most of the questions in the chat have been answered. So does anyone else have any more questions?
I have a quick question. I haven't had time to join the Discord yet, so shame on me. But this isn't really like a super technical question. Have you gotten a lot of requests from people trying to move from Liquid to say like Blazor or something of that nature? I use Liquid all the time, so I have no issue with Liquid. I'm actually just more so curious.
I don't remember such a request at all. What we have, well, no such specific request moving from Liquid to Blazor. We have seen people using Blazor with Orchard Core otherwise, so that's a viable front-end approach. We have seen people moving from Liquid to Razor, not Blazor, but Razor. You know, in that way, the front end is the same approach, it's just a different templating language. By the way, Orchard is not opinionated on what you use on the front end. If you were very attentive, then you may have noticed that I have a reference to jQuery in the Liquid file of our theme. that's just what comes with code generation, but that doesn't mean that you have to use jQuery or you have to use anything on the front end. What happens on the front end and actually what happens on the back end is completely up to your control. You can use whatever technologies, whatever frameworks that you want. What goes to the client is in the end up to you. Orchard can provide defaults, but you can change everything.
I guess the crux of the question was, I've looked at other open source CMSs, definitely not as richer feature as this, but I had noticed a lot of people had moved to Blazor instead of using Liquid, and this isn't me trying to sell you on that. Like Liquid is A-okay, not a problem. That's why I was asking, because a lot of people in the .NET community, from my experience, are very opinionated. C# is very opinionated, and the community is opinionated. That's something that I like, so that's not an issue to me. So that's why I was curious to see if that was something that was proposed or brought up to you, and that's really all I got.
Mm-hmm. It was brought up, but just a note there, let's make a distinction between Blazor server and Blazor WebAssembly. What I was more talking about was WebAssembly. That's possible to use without anything special. Blazor server is a little bit more complex because that also takes over the server side, of course, but that's also doable. People have done it. If you prefer to do that, that's also one approach. And by the way, a quick note about the previous question about having kind of a marketplace or something like that. There's no marketplace. There are no paid modules in the ecosystem yet because everything is open source. Well, go figure. Some people just don't want to earn money with modules, at least, and themes. But the Orchard marketplace is Nougat. So if you go to Nougat, search for Orchard Core, well, probably not Orchard Core because that will also bring up all the Orchard Core packages or the packages of Orchard Core itself as well. But if you search for something in Orchard Core, you will see what's available there. We did have an idea to have a catalog, at least, with a curated list of recommended extensions. We'll see whether we actually develop it anytime soon.
One other question in the chat, Klex has asked about how basically the CMS upgrades and patches work when you get new versions. He started off asking about source control and Git, but then he said he's not talking about like content. So and then he said he's talking about like upgrades and patches. So I'm not quite sure whether the question is about source control or whether it's like new versions of Orchard.
Let me try to answer both. When it comes to new versions of Orchard, it's a NuGet package update. So back to our demo project, you see that this is pretty much Orchard. This is where we get where Orchard is added to our otherwise standard ASP.NET Core application. It's on version 1.6 now, but if 1.7 comes out, well, you upgrade like this. I'm simplifying it a little bit, of course. There can be breaking changes. There can be breaking changes in your own code as well. So it needs a little bit more attention, but at the core, this is the upgrade process. If there's something more involved, then we have the release notes detailing what you have to do. About source control, there's nothing special. Also, we use Git with a fairly standard ASP.NET Core Git ignore. You just keep all of your code in source control. You don't put your database. I used SQLite for local development into source control because everybody, when they work with the app, initialize it on their own machine with a setup recipe. And then they can quickly iterate because they can wipe it, rerun the setup again, which, by the way, can be done automatically, even without seeing the setup screen just on the first request. Adam also had a question. He raised his hand. or was that question?
Hello. No, it was about the how do you publish modules and how do you load your own modules in. But going back to the example that you've got there and explaining how you upgrade the Orchard Core, I think has answered the question. Thank you.
Yeah, mostly like this. If you want to share your module or theme with the community, then again, NuGet would be the avenue for that, and the GitHub project or something like that, if you want to keep it open source. But as mentioned, I'm not aware of any openly available but closed source Orchard extensions. Of course, people are creating closed source extensions for Orchard all the time for their custom applications, but these are not otherwise published.
Awesome stuff. I think that's all the questions from the chat. I don't know whether anyone else has any. If you do, shout out now. Sounds like there's not. So with that, I just want to give a massive thank you to Zoltán. If everyone can just unmute and give Zoltán a big round of applause for an awesome talk. And,
thank you very much.
Yeah, I kind of need to.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Zoltán. Appreciate it.
Hey, thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah, that was really interesting. Thank you very much.